Go.
Well, good morning, Eben Sadie from Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's very cold here today. It's about 14 degrees as I was driving to work this morning. I think it's 7 o'clock in the afternoon there. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. It's 7 o'clock, but it's more like 105 degrees here.
Wow. But I think that's not a live picture behind you, but I hope it's a beautiful day. I hope it was a beautiful day like that as it is here today.
That's beautiful.
And I hope you and your family, people you care about, are doing well in these difficult times that we're living in.
No, we do. We're very privileged, obviously, to live on a farm. You know, you've just got a little bit more space and a little bit of more sanity. So yeah. During this very troubled year, I mean, everybody experienced the year different. And I do think that in our particular instance, my family and myself, we were incredibly privileged to just have a little bit more space and a little bit more fresh air generally throughout. So it came as a huge premium throughout the year, and something we don't take for granted.
Well, I also want to congratulate you on your coverage in the current issue of Wine Spectator.
No, I haven't seen it. Somebody called me today, but I try and stay away from all that stuff much. But yeah, no, I mean, it's always nice when people write nice things about your wine, but then I think you must be equally enthusiastic when people write less nice things about your wine. It's easy to be amped up about the good times, but you know, I think positive criticism is also good. So,
you know, we had one of these tastings with a very famous chef named Thomas Keller, and he talked about the fact that when you get a Michelin 3-star rating or any variation on that theme, it is recognizing something you were doing a year ago, and you'd better be sure to be doing as well today as you were a year ago when the Michelin Guide visited your restaurant and wrote a review.
No, absolutely. Otherwise, you're on the wrong trajectory.
Right. Well, so I was hoping you would take a few minutes and just tell us about you. You are really an iconoclastic winemaker, making very, very unusual wines with a very personal imprint. And I just am fascinated to hear you tell us where you came from and how you got here and how you ended up, as people who are joining us today are sampling the first wine, the white wine, the Scorpion, the 2019 Scorpion. I hope you would just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up being this force in South African winemaking.
I grew up in a small fishing village, quite removed from the world of wine, but I did attend a school of agriculture as a youngster. And, you know, when I got older and it was time to go to college, I kind of did my military service at the time, as we all were inclined to do. You know, it was compulsory at the time. And when I came through my military service, I started going to study agriculture. And in that period of studying agriculture, one of my subjects was viticulture. And I took a massive liking in the subject. I love plants. I love growing plants. I understand plants. And then, you know, then it went the classic story. You know, you taste a couple of wines that kind of rocked the boat for me. And, you know, I recognized that wine was, it was this absolute force, you know, where you can be transported through this liquid into so many variable places around the world, you know. And for me, the fascinating thing was, if a wine was true, if it was absolutely true to what it claimed on its label in terms of its wine of origin, its grape variety, its history, its heritage, its traditions, you know, you can, by sniffing a wine, that wine can almost transport you to the place that it came from, you know, instantly. And obviously the French refer to that as the notion of terroir, you know, that embedded imprint in the wine. And I studied wine, and then I decided to study enology, studied the science and the chemistry of wine, and I started making technically sound wines, as I think most people do. And then at the same time, went to Europe, started going to Europe, and I firmly, it just dawned on me that tradition, history, all those notions were equally important as was the technical aspects of wine, because wine, it's not a pharmaceutical product, you know, it's something that needs to transport so many variable dynamics into the bottle. And I ended up working for a big part of my life. I worked actually in California, I worked in Oregon, I worked in France, I worked in Spain, was in Spain for a long time, actually a decade. Ended up working in Germany, Austria, and I made it my business to go and work with some of the better producers out there in the world, you know, and I think that cross-pollination definitely changed the way I look at wine today. And then I came back to South Africa. I didn't come from a family of wine, so I was free to do exactly what I wanted. I ended up doing projects for other people, so I was employed. But as my last boss said, I'm completely unemployable. Mm-hmm. So I had to make other plans. I'm quite OCD, I'm quite perfectionistic in everything I do. So very difficult for me to work in an organization if the head of the organization is not in that same realm of perfectionism and drive. And you know, my whole thing's been, I really strive for excellence. And I have no ambition whatsoever to make a lot of wine. I have no ambition whatsoever to be wealthy. But I am very, very set on every activity that I'm involved in to complete that exercise in the realm of excellence. And so I started making wine.
May I interrupt? May I interrupt? You
Yeah.
said you understand plants. What did you mean by that?
The one thing is you can study the chemistry of the plant, you know, and the physiology of the plant. And most plants have more or less the same dynamics in terms of their needs. But growing the vine, you know, having lived in, I think I lived in 11 different countries. And I've worked with this plant because I always worked in the vineyards. I don't for a moment think that the wine's made in the winery. I'm convinced that all the efforts in the vineyard in the end dictates the wine's quality. Obviously, for me, the cellar is a place where you can only lose. You can't create anything in the cellar. I've seen multiple examples where the same vineyard, the same grapes were made in two completely different styles. And then at its time of bottling, the wines look completely variable. And then when you leave those wines for 18, 20 years, it's actually staggering how close they've grown in identity. Because once the neo-oak or the excessive extraction or the under-extraction and whatever the differential points were, once those have eased off, what I call the winemaking notions, the wine still resets back to what it was and the DNA that was formed on the plant. And so I made wines, technical wines, and then kind of started dabbling in the world of making natural wine. Started the first natural fermentations in South Africa, busy with organic practices in the vineyards, you know, and it's been an amazing journey in the last 20 years to learn how to work with nature, not against it, to be observant, to be disciplined, and to be very intuitive to your surroundings. And I think a lot of people I meet that produce wine have kind of got this obsession of making the world's perfect wine. And often I think in the world, it's kind of reflected on as the wine of 100 points. But I think that's such this low fun. That's fun at a low level. Because how can that scale be the scale of something that's just so dramatically complex? So I today say that I would rather opt for making the lesser wine. But for me today, the best wine possible is the most honest wine, and that's the best true reflection of that site. And if you have selected great sites, and if your wine becomes true reflections of those sites, and you've actually taken your foot off the winemaking and all of that, then you start farming wine in a realm where your wine is truly a liquid expression of what's going on in the soil and the dynamics of the work. But I see a lot of wine that's wine making based, and that's completely not what we want to do.
Eben, we had a tasting Saturday with Daniel Javier from Domaine Tempier in Provence. And he said that his favorite wine in the wine cellar right now is the 2012 just Bandol Rouge, not one of the single vineyard wines. That his favorite wine to drink is the 2012 Bandol Rouge, which is a troubled vintage for them. It was very difficult. There was a lot of rain, and but right now it's the best wine in their cellar.
Now I actually drank a 2013 Tempier La Migola Saturday, so 2 days ago.
That's amazing.
I truly love, and I work with a lot of Mauvert. It's a really difficult grape. But then set out and to make a long story short, today we have a very small domain. We only produce 65,000 bottles, which is roughly around 4,500, 5,000 cases in a great year. And my life spent around making the things that we already do better. I come from a world where I made 7 million bottles of wine, and now I make 65,000 bottles, and I'm working 400-fold harder now than when I was making the 7 million bottles. And we have 30 hectares, and on the 30 hectares we take about 20 hectoliters per hectare, which is very low.
Right.
And all bush vines, all farmed in the Goblet style. We cultivate the land in old ways, still very manual. There's 23 people working here. So we're 23 people tending to 30 hectares. And people say, but that's excessive to have that many people. And then I also, the only thing I can say is intensity. Every shoot positioning, every pruning cut, every scissor that cuts that vine, the sharpness of the scissor on every cut, everything is controlled. It's never perfect. I always feel it can get better. But I'm pedantic, and I have a very good team. It's a very young team, working very close to them. Great wine is not produced by an individual. It's produced by a network of a common thread of very many people that all share one singular vision. I think when you paint on a canvas in a studio and it's only you and the pastel in your hand and the mixing of the paints and you paint, that's true artistry, because it only comes down to a singular individual. But wine isn't exactly the same, although it carries some of the emotions of that spectrum of art in it. Wine is not the same, because a great wine is made by more than one man's hands. And your ability ultimately, and what's going to determine in the end how close you're going to get to your dream is your ability to train and educate other people and impart skills and get buy-in on every single level, from the most elementary to the highest level in the organization or in the firm or in the activity. And our winery is very small, as you can imagine. We have a huge agricultural centrum. We make a lot of our sprays ourselves. Every single action we have distilled down to our art. And there's very many things we're actually only discovering now. The last 3 years, we went through the biggest drought in the last 80 years in the country. And people say it's terrible. And I say, yes, the drought was really terrible. But the drought came and put like a forensic eye on every little aspect of what we were doing. When you go into the stress and pressure, that's why you pressure test a watch to see it can keep its time at base level, but can it keep time 200 meters underwater? Can it keep time high up in atmospheric pressure? Can it keep the time if it's had a knock, if it has a bump? I don't want to watch that just keeps time when it's quiet and still on my hand behind my desk. Must keep time all the time. So the drought for me is, and for us as a small winery, came and pressure tested every single aspect that we're busy with. And the drought, as bad as it was, I think the drought turned us into better farmers. I think we effectively, over 3 years of drought, we won a decade in experience. And you can never win in 10 years of intensive training in any camp. And the vineyards are good. All our vineyards are not on one farm. We farm on 18 properties. And we farm 75% of the vineyards. We farm everything from planting cover crops, pruning, suckering, spraying, crop thinning, everything. 75% is under our complete control. And the other 25% is currently in the management of their owners, but they are very good grape growers. They're professional grape growers. So whether we do the job or whether they do the job, the outcome will be similar. So, there's no merits in those 25% instances to go buy an extra tractor, an extra set of spray pumps, an extra team of vineyard workers. We can do it with the existing teams on the farms. So, all in all, small project, 90 tons, 65,000 bottles, and very tuned in. And the other interesting thing is we work with 28 grape varieties. When you look at climates like Burgundy, Piedmont, Germany, Austria, you'll always find in the majority of cases, there's always exceptions, but when you look at these continental climates, they're always nominally dominated by 1 or 2 varieties in a region. Burgundy, there's 4. Piedmont, there's really 4. Germany, there's really 3, but it's actually Riesling. So in continental climates, it's a norm that usually it's defined by 1 or 2, 3 varieties. And that's purely because continental climates are very difficult climates. And through natural selection, usually only 1, 2, 3 varieties really excel in those climates. But I farm in a climate that's very Mediterranean. And most varieties grow well in the Mediterranean. So we work with grapes from Greece, southern Italy, southern Spain, southern Portugal, southern France, and some of the grapes on the Mediterranean islands. So typical grapes to our area will be Syrah, Mourvèdre, Grenache, Carian, Cinsault, Tinta Barocca, Tinta Amarella, Tinta Francesa, Pontac, Agrigetico, almost unpronounceable grapes. For whites it will be Chenin Blanc, Grenache Blanc, Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier, Claret, Palomino, Semillon Blanc, Semillon Gris, Grillo, Catarato, Fiano, Fermentino, Falangina. And many of them are actually still in trial phase, and some of these trials work really well. I'm nervous about global warming. It's a whole argument and a whole debate on its own. Is it true? Is it not true? But I always say I'll rather be wrong about global warming and be ready for it than being wrong and not being ready for it. So we've planted a lot of varieties that I believe they're going to be better adapted in a new world in the future of limited rainfall, increased temperature, increased hydric stress, increased sunburn, increased everything. So a lot of the varieties were selected on their ability to withstand the climate shift that we anticipate.
One of the things that is, we've had more than 40 of these Zoom wine tastings with a lot of really famous winemakers, chefs, sommeliers, winery owners, and global climate change always seems to come up almost every tasting. And the kind of common thread is you can argue about global warming that, we are, in Austria, they're harvesting in August where they used to harvest in October. And the grapes are riper in August than they used to be in October. And, there's only one real way to explain that. But the other common thread is that not only is their climate warmer, but it's more extreme. That if it rains, where it used to rain 1.5 inches, and now it rains 7 inches. And if it hails, where it used to wipe out, 10% of your vineyard, now it wipes out the entire vineyard. And if it's hot, it's 20 degrees warmer than it used to be. It's not a 5-degree spike, it's a 20-degree spike. A winemaker in Beaujolais told me a few weeks ago that when he started as the winemaker at this well-known estate, his grapes generally yielded wines that were between 9 and 11% alcohol. That was the late 80s. And his 2020s are going to be 15% alcohol.
No, absolutely. I mean, I like Barolo, Barbaresco, those wines I love. I love the wines from Burgundy, as everybody does. I mean, you need to be like a palate illiterate not to like Burgundy. But I also like a lot the wines of Germany. And I'm an avid Riesling fan, and also a big fan of the wines of the Loire. And I spoke two weeks ago with a friend of mine from the Mosel, and he said to me, and it's actually, Spätlese, Auslese is all wonderful, but I love good Cabernet wines. For summer drinking, I think the Cabernets, they enter into a realm where very few wines go anywhere. And he said to me, it's becoming impossible to make Riesling Cabernet. And that's a tragedy, because that's a beautiful type of wine that existed in the world, and it's becoming, you can make Ausleses and you can make Spätleses and whatever, that's all going to happen still. But the one that's kind of suffering is the Riesling Cabernet. So it is, and I mean, this year, the harvest in Burgundy, I mean, how alarming early it was. I mean, there's never been anything that's like remote to that. And it's been the picking dates has been pushing forward and forward and forward. And I can just say from my own account here in the Swartland, I don't pick wines too ripe because I don't drink wines that's very ripe. So why would I want to produce something that I don't necessarily would drink? So I'm not an avid 15% wine drinker. My life of wine is somewhere between 13.5 and 14. That said, I've had some of my greatest wines in the world I've ever had. It's been over 15. So, I mean, you can never generalize. But 95% of the wine I drink is between 13 and 14. And I can now see that we're struggling today at 13% alcohol to get the same chemistry we had a decade and a half ago to 2 decades ago on 14%. So the acidity I used to get 15 years ago on 14 alcohol grapes, I don't even get that high acidity now picking at 13. So what we're essentially experiencing here is what I call a pH and acidity meltdown, you know, and anybody that knows a little bit about the chemistry of wine, those are two very important parameters. And so a lot of the new varieties we've planted and that we're cultivating and that we're trying to figure out how to cultivate them, were planted with the main objective that they will in the future bring into our wines greater acidity, greater freshness, and lower points of alcohol ripeness. You know, if you take a grape like Alicante Bouschet or Garnacha Tintorera, I can pick it at 12% alcohol and it's full ripe. Claret Blanche, you can pick at 11% alcohol with good acidity and it's full ripe. Colombo, the same. Fiano, Fermentino here. Assyrtiko, you can pick Assyrtiko here on the coastal chalk outlying areas that we've planted. You can pick it at 11% alcohol and it brings amazing freshness to your final wine. I think that's a much more natural way of approaching it. I mean, you can add acid into your wine as easy as by ordering some tartaric acid online and throwing it with a scoop into your wine. But that's not farming the future, that's just fixing. That's like quick fixes. If you want to fix the future, you need to plant and you need to be progressive. And our wineries are very, we make all our white wines and all our red wines exactly the same because we don't want funny things in the cellar because we need the cellar to be an absolute blank mirror that can reflect back to us what our wines are about. You know, as I said, in the winery, the objective is not to make the world's most perfect wine. We want to make the most honest wine that could be the best reflection of that site so that we can learn what's going on in that vineyard so that we can farm it for what it needs to be. So it's a completely different way of looking at, you know, the role of a winery. And often you will see a guy or a girl, whatever, will go into a wine and say, I need to make a Bordeaux blend and it's got to taste like blueberries with cassis, cedarwood, cigar box, bing, bang, boom, and that will be 100 points. Without even having seen the vineyard, without having tended to the vines, without having cultivated the vines, without having even looked at the soil analysis, without having even looked at the organic status of the soil, the carbon content, how the soil sequestrate carbon, without looking at any of those things. And that's building wines around consumer expectation. But what has that got to do with agriculture and the farming and the art of growing grapes? So I actually, when I work with a vineyard, I have no fixed thing in my mind as to what I think it ought to be, can be, and should be. It must be what it is, and that's it, and that's the end of it. But the only way you can let go in the winery is you must be completely confident in your efforts in the cellar, in the vineyards. You must be so, and I always say to to my own two sons, both of my sons are also entering into this world. I said to them, there's a big difference between pride and arrogance. Arrogance is not good, but you got to be proud of what you do, and you must take pride in your day-to-day job. Whatever it is, how small and insignificant it might be. If we don't have the cleanest drains in the world in our cellar, we won't have the cleanest implements in our shed. We won't have our implements completely in complete maintained state. The tractors won't be perfect. Our traction controls won't be right. Our compaction regimes in our vineyards won't be right. Everything, every aspect. If we can't keep the drains right, we're not going to get anything right. So it's from the spider webs in the corner of the buildings all the way through to the drains. And it's even how the people are dressed in the morning. If they look like a bunch of douchebags, they're probably douchebags. You know, must be tidy, neat, on time for work. And that's how we run. And for us, it's worked. And I often ask the people in my team if I've been a pain in the ass. And then sometimes they say yes, but mostly they say they enjoy the environment because everybody knows exactly where they stand. And for the moment, I have no ambition to grow. We must first get better. I feel like we're not nearly producing the wines we can. Not nearly, we're not within a breath of what we can be producing.
Have you seen, Eben, have you seen a documentary called A Year in Burgundy?
No, I haven't seen that one.
It's you would enjoy it, I think. It's on Netflix. It's basically a overview of Martin Saulnier's 4 primary Burgundy producers, and it kind of follows them through a year in the vineyards and winery. And I think the focus is to explain why Leroy costs more than Perelmino, which costs more than Rossignol Trappe, which costs more than Bruno Clavelier. But there's this scene, and maybe it's staged, maybe it's not, but there's a scene in the movie where Louise Leroy, who is, I think, in her late 80s or 90s at this point, is in Von Romane Le Brûlé, and she's taking two vines and tying them together to create the canopy. And right next to her, the row next to her is a tractor with basically 2 lawnmowers going out to each side, going along, just chopping off the tops of all the vines.
That's it.
You know, that kind of, you know, that's some, I mean, why is Leroy, you know, $2,000 a bottle and the guy next door is $300 a bottle? That's kind of the reason. I mean, it's
no, of course, but also the other thing that I found that's pivotal, and I just look, you know, I drink maybe a case of our own wine in a year in my house. I drink other people's wine. I'm inspired by other people, you know. I mean, yet there are 1,000 people in this world that produce wines that's far surpassing our efforts. And you know, I taste those wines, and sometimes I sit in my kitchen and I'm like intimidated. You know, I'm like, geez, I can't believe what this guy's doing. You know, I'm sitting in my house and I'm intimidated, but at the same time, I'm like invigorated, and I'm like, yeah, it's like I get inspired massively by tasting great wines. You know, and it's like you talk about Leroy. I've been privileged to sit in tastings, taste her wines, with Jair's wines, with DRC. You know, and we all know their different approaches to destemming whole bunches, partial clusters, whatever. And I've gone through years and years of trying to follow, drinking their wines, analyzing their wines, trying to understand where they're going. But the thing that sets them apart, I think, is, and it's the same if you go to Frederic Mounier or Armand Rousseau or all these growers, or if you go to Bruno Chiacosa and Piemonte or all these guys, in the end, it's consistency. You need to be consistent. You know, everybody can make a very good wine then and again, but to produce great wine over time, all the time, that means understanding of the system, the whole system, the complete dynamics of the plant, the variables of climate, and our response to climate. And it's fascinating when you taste those domains wines, or, you know, and there's wineries in the world, I actually don't even particularly like the style of their wine, but I have such an admiration for their consistency through that style that I am a fan. You know, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
I absolutely.
It's not even my cup of tea, but I can admire it.
I say that all the time. You know, when I taste wine, which I do obviously often and professionally, I say I may be a drunk, but I'm a professional drunk. You know, when I taste wine, I'm not tasting wine to determine if it's my favorite wine I've tasted this year. I'm tasting wine to see if I find it compelling, true to its self, a reflection of the place and the grape and the people that make it. You know, there's a lot. I mean, if I were going to choose a bottle of wine to take home to have with dinner tonight, there are not very many Argentine Malbecs that I would choose, that I would default to as wine with dinner tonight. But that doesn't mean that when I taste a really excellent wine made by Nicholas Catena, that I don't appreciate the brilliance of it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, we had a tasting recently with Jeremy Sace from Domaine du Jacques, and I asked him to explain why his wines are so relatively inexpensive, because, you know, his best wine maybe sells for $400 a bottle, and Romanée-Conti sells for $6,000 a bottle, and Romanée-Conti's not 15 times better wine than Dujac Chambertin. And he just laughed at me. He said, we were there 6 months ago and tasted in the cellars with Aubert de Villaine, and our wines are nowhere even comparable to his wines.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been privileged to have gone there and tasted there a number of times, and you just need to stand there, and then all I want to do is come home to whip some ass so that we can get better, you know, because I'm inspired, you know, and when I say whipping ass, I'm starting with my own, you know.
I'm ready to suggest that you were talking about your ass first.
Yeah, no, my ass first, because but I have a very supportive system. We are home that gets up at 4:45 every day of the year. So that's when my day starts, at 4:45 a.m. and it ends about at 1900 every day. And whatever happens between those two time slots, you know, it's going to be full on. And it's amazing when you work those hours effectively what you can do in a lifetime. You know, this whole domain, I didn't come from a family of wine. I started with $100,000, no, $10,000, sorry, $10,000 20 years ago. That's all I had.
Wow.
And have managed to, through doing things right, in 20 years, I've bought 35 acres. I've planted 45 acres. Some of it on not my own land, but in long-term rentals. I've developed this domain. I've built a house. I've built a cellar. I've built farming installations. I've built tractors. And it's not of wines that cost $400. So some wines that cost $40, you know. It's just hard work, a constructive plan, and before you know, in 20 years, you can shift a mountain. I had the other day, we were bottling at the winery, right? And the guy who helps me with bottling, he just bottled at one of my colleagues' wineries, much bigger winery. We only bottle 6 days a year. In 6 days, we bottle our whole production. We bottle about 10,000 bottles a day. 6 days, that's it. But this colleague of mine, he went and he bottled for 6 weeks at another winery. And there's two ladies at the back of the line that takes the bottles off the line and put them in a bin. So after 6 weeks, they worked out that those two ladies, between the two of them, moved 400 tons over 80 miles, over 35 miles. 400 tons over 35 miles. That's what they shifted in 6 weeks. And what's got to be, when he said it to me, you know, I so resonate with this because if you were to tell both those ladies that they're going to have to take 400 tons and carry it for 35 miles, they would have fainted and fell to the ground. But little by little, chipping off the block, they moved 400 tons, 350 tons, 400 tons over 35 miles in 6 weeks. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
that also explains how you build, that's how you build pyramids. And
well,
that's
how do you eat an
Yeah,
elephant one bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about this extraordinary wine, this 2019 Scorpion, please.
It's an extraordinary vineyard that is planted on the west coast. It was planted about 80 years ago. And as my friends say, they think it was planted on a Monday because all the bundles of the vineyards got mixed up completely. So it's an interplanted vineyard. It's planted to Cabernet, it's planted to Chenin Blanc and Colombo. And yeah, those two varieties, sorry, the Chenin Blanc and the Palomino, they were co-planted, they completely mixed. And yeah, I think about 50-50 is the planting in total. And yeah, it's a very good thing because the vineyard planted in plain pure chalk. We never understood why they planted the vineyard there because it's the only vineyard of its kind planted in that era there. And this is the area of the Swartland that's very low altitude. It's only 60 meters, which will be 180 feet above sea level. So it's very low. It's a mile from the ocean, pure white chalk. It looked like, I don't know if you know Jerez in Spain. It's that kind of vibe. It's planted like Jerez in Spain. So yeah, I can maybe try, I don't know if you want, I could share a screen picture here with you and then I can show you what the vineyard looks like.
I'll make you the host and then you can do that.
I can show you I can try. I'm not that bright with technology, but I can try.
Do that now.
Then I'll show you because sometimes a picture says more than 1,000 words. It's an extraordinary vineyard that should not be there. And the chalkiness of the soil combined with the varieties being Chenin Blanc and Palomino makes for this wine. You will taste the wine's very saline, very salty, very mineral. It's usually low in alcohol, 12.8% alcohol, beaming acidity. Yeah. I can show you. Can you see there?
Yes. Oh,
So that gives you an idea of the planting of the vineyards. So it's very old bush vines.
Wow.
I don't know, can you see the screen changing?
Yes. How old are those vines? Those vines are what, 75 years old maybe?
No, they're just north of 80. I think they're like 83 years old.
Wow. And
So
why
that's
Palomino?
Pardon?
Why Palomino blended with the Chenin Blanc? That's just what was there, and so that's what you harvest and what you vinify, or is there?
Yeah, that is just what was planted in the site. You know, so it's, and you can see in this picture where the lady is picking here. You know, it's like pure, almost beach sand on top,
right?
And then under that is the lime soils. It's a very, and I'm going to load this picture and you can see, this is a picture, aerial shot in harvest when we were picking. Do you see the vine there? They almost look like octopuses. They look like sea creatures.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
So it's a very unique, rare vineyard. I always say if Mad Max had a vineyard, this will be it.
Are you aware of another wine in the world that's a blend of Chenin Blanc and Palomino?
No, not that I'm aware of.
No.
But do you know the wines of Enviate in
Carneros. The Canary Islands.
yeah, those kind of island wines, very mineral, very salty. It's this kind of vibe.
Right. You mentioned, wow. So is your, I mean, somebody asked me the other day, how would you quantify the excellence of this, the Scorpion and the Scarfberg? I mean, how, and I said, well, there's Hugh at Clodeborg and there's Sadie Family, Scorpion and Scarfberg, and that's about it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I buy all UX wines. I've been following their wines for 25 years. I've been to their vineyards. Benjamin, who manages the vineyards at UX, is a very good friend of mine. Every time I go there and I see how his vineyards look, I feel like a loser.
Why?
He's an extraordinary farmer. Extraordinary. I think they get slightly higher acidity than we do, and they can get away with slightly higher residual as opposed to us. But in terms of phenolics, when you look at the actual phenolic content of our wines, because that's the one thing I think a lot of people don't know. It's fine to have phenolics in white wines. You know, one thing is producing a swimming pool Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, that's one thing. But if you want to make or produce a white wine that's going to be enjoyed with cuisine, with food, the whole pairing, or you just want to drink it on its own over a number of hours or over 2-3 days, then you need phenolics. And our wines, especially if you look at Scorpion and Scarfberg, it's two vineyards with enormous phenolic structures. Footpath has the most phenols. It's our smallest single vineyard, but we only produce 2,000 bottles, so I don't know if there's much of that going all over the world. But all I can say is other people will find out the phenolics in their white wines if they had this volume of phenolics. We don't ever fine our wines. We don't filter our wines. We do nothing. As they are from the vineyards, that's how they go to bottle. The only thing we add to wine is about between 60 and 75 parts per million total of sulfur. I used to make sulfur-free wines, but that didn't work out too well. It worked well if the wines were to always stay at our winery. But when wines go in the road on the back of trucks, over lunch breaks, with failed cooling systems, with shipping liners, containers in the port, getting unpacked in the sun, we all know how the logistics of wine run. I always say I wish wine was like fish and that it would kill you if it got warm, because then the cold chain would have been respected. But what happens is when wine gets warm, they only say the winemaker made a bad wine.
Yeah.
You know,
I always say no matter how fancy the wine store, no matter how fancy the wine, it comes down to a guy with a two-wheeler.
Yeah.
You know, who moves it from one place to the next. Do you think this is the best? I know you've already said that you kind of don't like talking about good, better, best, but you know, these 2019s did get extraordinary press. Do you think this 19 Scorpion is the best vintage of Scorpion that you've made, or how do you feel about that?
I think I like 15 a lot. The other thing is with our wines, you shouldn't really drink them if they're not between 8 and 10 years old. Right. You might have bought them, but it doesn't mean you got your money. And I think it's for a lot of fine wine. Right. I can't tell you how irritated I am sometimes in my own cellar of wines that I've only started buying a number of years ago and I still can't drink them. Imagine, I've got some Burgundy producers been buying their wines for 14 years and I still can't really open them. You know, you can't open up a Grand Cru of a prolific vineyard if it's not 15, 16, 18 years old. I mean, you can, but were you a good owner in the end of that bottle? Maybe that bottle should have belonged to somebody else. Because in the end, it doesn't matter. It's not about money. It's about good ownership. And so I like 15 Scorpion a lot. The 19 is one of our most linear, I would say, acidic, linear, and direct examples that we've made. I do think it's going to be marvelous in 4 or 5 years' time. I like the 19 wines, and to be fair, when I made an early call in 2019, I didn't think the vintage was going to get that good. The 19s came out much better than I ever thought. It was the 3rd year of the drought. The hydric stress and the drought stress and the heat stress, as 2 points working together, pushed us here to norm where we only picked 15 hectoliters per hectare. So on a financial note, we made no money. After now having bottled that wine, sold it all, we broke even. We broke even on most of our vineyards. There's of the 48 vineyards we farm, I think we broke even on 60% of them. We didn't even couldn't even realize a profit even at bottle price because the yields were just that low. So 19 is this weird wines where I think it's some of the most extraordinary wines we ever made, but I also know we can't do it year on year because we'll just be financially, we'll be under. And then at the same time, I don't think you make a better wine from 15 hectoliters per hectare than 30. It depends what is the effort, the combined effort looking like? The growth in the plant, the balance of the vineyard, the shoot lengths, the status of the soil moisture at veraison, the soil moisture at fruit set, at flowering, end of ripening, where's your soil moisture? We don't irrigate our vineyards, and I've got soil probes in all of my soils. I know the moisture in all of my soils, not all of them, but in most of them, because if I see the moisture in the soils are dropping like heavily, if you don't irrigate, do you know what's the best way to irrigate a vineyard that you don't have water to irrigate it with? You drop the crop. Yeah. It's a form of irrigation. A very expensive form of irrigation, but it's a form of irrigation. But it normally is indicative of your yield being out of place. So anywhere between 20 to 25 hectoliters per hectare is a good figure for us. 35 is a lot, and 15 is uneconomical. And this wine, the 2019 you've all got in the class, it's an uneconomical wine. It's basically my charity project for 2019.
Well, I feel like an excellent beneficiary of your charity. When I poured this glass and I poured myself, a half an ounce maybe, this room filled with the aroma of the wine. I mean, it's young. I mean, it's a, infantile wine, but it's a very, very special. It's a very, very special wine.
I want to challenge the consumers and the wine passionate people that's looking at this recording or this program. They've got the wine open already. Keep the wine open for 2 weeks and drink every day that much. You will discover a wonderful world in this bottle because our wines are not held together by chemistry. The material is in the bottle, the good work, the good everything. Just drink. I mean, the other bottles you can open and drink in one shot, end of story. But this particular bottle, open it, drink a third the first night, and then little bits in increments over 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You will see the wine won't fall apart after a week or two, because it's got the things that makes the wine glue together is much bigger than sulfur or acid or any other winemaking geeky thing. It's actually in the fruit.
We had do you know Christian Moreau?
Yeah.
We had a tasting with him a few months ago, and I, recorded it at 10 o'clock in the morning as I'm doing this one, because it's unreasonable to expect him to get up at 2:30 in the morning to conduct a wine tasting with me. And we tasted Chablis Vaillon and Chablis Les Clos. And again, I tasted, a half ounce of each wine. I put the cork back in them, and that night when I got home, I stuck them in the refrigerator, and they're fabulous wines. I wanted to enjoy them. I didn't want to, normally you would drink the Chablis, then the Premier Cru, and then the Grand Cru, but I didn't want to, be 2 weeks later and the Grand Cru had gone south. So I drank the Grand Cru first over a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, as you're suggesting. Then I drank the Vaillon over a few days, as you were suggesting. And I actually poured myself a glass of the Chablis, the Village Chablis, 3 weeks after 3 weeks and 12 hours after I opened it. And it was absolutely glorious. Now it had been in the refrigerator, it was cold, but still.
Do you know what's interesting sometimes in that regard? If you look at like some of the Grand Cru vineyards, and so if you take Grand Cru's bead in Chassagne, in Corton, whatever, or in Chablis, often the Grand Cru sites in Burgundy can get Chardonnay to a ripeness level in any vintage that can't be achieved by all vineyards. And by and large, the definition in the old days for the Grand Crus was that they could, you must remember, Burgundy in the old days had problems getting ripe.
Right.
So often the Grand Cru sites are sites that have no problem, even in like rainy, insipid years, to get to high sugar levels. And sometimes I see on the Grand Crus that because they are picked at higher sugar levels, higher alcohol levels, lower acidity, fuller pHs and all of that, that once you open them, they actually move quite fast in the bottle. And then what you've just experienced, you'll have maybe a wine from a lesser vineyard with a lesser classification, which might have come in with a almost out of proportionally high acidity. And then that wine's almost kind of bulletproof. So,
Eben, can you hold on just 1 second?
No problem.
You got it? I'm sorry, my boss is going to handle whatever that is for me. And I apologize for that.
No.
Christian said that in 2018, he sold off a lot of the Les Clos because it would have been 15% alcohol if he let it ferment dry. And he didn't want to, Chablis should not be 15% alcohol, so he just sold the juice off to other producers.
No, it's going to be tough, but it's not tough for them. It's tough for all of us.
Right. Well, everybody, I mean, it's, Joel Peterson talked a few weeks ago about the fires and how that's just reality. And if you're a winemaker in California or Oregon or Australia, the fires are there every year. It's not an anomaly anymore. It's every single year. So how do you deal with it? How do you deal with the smoke taint? What do you do to keep the fires away from your vineyards and your wineries? It's just reality. And I always say, if you think global climate change is a hoax, talk to any winemaker in the world.
No, otherwise wine is lying. And I know for a fact that it's not.
There you go. So tell me, we need to move on to the Puff Adder, but tell me those bottles that you tasted back early on that resonated with you, that you said you tasted a couple of wines that were extraordinary, that gave you a realization that wine could be something really special. Do you remember what those wines were?
Of course. So I think, when I started my journey of wine, when you talk about the teenager palate, you know, when you just discover that you've got all these tastes and wonderful things. You know, in the beginning, I was really blown away by wines like Cloudy Bay, you know, the Sauvignon Blanc. At the time, you must remember this was in the 90s, early 90s, 90, 91, 92, Cloudy Bay just started, you know, Hannon started with these reductive winemaking. You know, that was kind of spearheading the world of reductive white winemaking, you know, with the Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs. I mean, today, I don't even drink Sauvignon Blanc for much anymore. There's one or two Sauvignon Blancs in Sancerre that I still like actively buy, but I'm not a big Sauvignon Blanc fan. I don't think it's just my personal fan, you know. So, but I remember Chardonnays. I used to, you know, I tasted Leuven, the art series, Chardonnays, the wines of Brian Crozer at the time, Stag's Leap Vineyards, Cast 23, The 5, Martha's Vineyards, Heights, you know, the wines of Old Bronstein, the Diamond Creek, Cakebread Cellars, Spotswood at the time, the old what was it called? My memory is starting to fail me.
Well, back when Beth Novak Milliken was making Spotswood, she was making some of them.
Yeah, it was. It's extraordinary. That's on the American side, and then, you know, for me it was really discovering the wines. It was white wine that triggered me first. So it was like the wines of Alsace, like from Marcel Dice, wow, Albert Boxler, wines from George Breuer, Egon Miller. You know, Egon Miller was cheap in those days. I was a student and I could buy Egon Miller. Now you need to be a serious businessman to buy Egon Miller. Now it was the white wines of Huet. You know, the first time I drank a Huet Vouvray, Claude de Bourg or Hodson Louis, I about fainted. I couldn't believe that wine could taste like that. You know, the wines of Didier Dagner, Vatan, just amazing journey, you know, and yeah, from there it moved on. So some of those wines I still drink today. Some of those wines I'm still an avid fan of.
Like this minute. And
others I'm kind of moved on from. So, you know, I think you fall in love with wine. Some of those wines I still love today.
I'm really sorry, Eben, but give me just 1 second. I'll be right back, and please accept my apology.
No worries. In the morning.
Well, why don't you talk about the 2017 Pathfinder while I'm gone?
I'll do that. So, Pathfinder 2017, obviously made from a grape called Cinsault. It's not a very well-known grape. It's a grape that actually fell to bad repute in the 70s, not only in South Africa on a national level, but also in France. The problem with, or the challenge with Cinsault is it has a tendency to bear too much fruit. And so any grape that's a heavy bearing grape, by large, sometimes means that you're going to have lack of color proliferation in the berries. You're going to have problems with extracting color in the fermentations. You're going to have tannin meltdown, acid meltdown, all these realities. So, but by 1920, I mean, in South Africa, the most planted red grape in the country, and it basically comprised 90% of the national planting. So if you came to South Africa in 1920, by 1920, 80% of the country is planted only to Cinsault. It's the workhorse grape of the country, and by large overworked. overgrown, overcropped, and the grape just got the worst rap ever. And it actually almost became like the ugly duckling of the industry. But yet, a magnitude of these old vineyards survived through First World War, Second World War, the apartheid era in South Africa. It survived all of that. And yeah, we basically took a stance in 2009. I embarked on producing what at that stage was the first single vineyard Cinsault bottling in the country. That was in 2009, which is basically yesterday. And today there's 55 single vineyard bottlings of Cinsault in South Africa. You know, it's come a long way, and Cinsault crews have been formulated in the country. There's designated vineyard Cinsault bottlings today. And the grape is so amazing. If you crop it at respectable low levels, or just respectable levels, you farm it well. In our instance, we fermented 80% whole bunch. So it's a whole cluster fermentation, almost like, you know, one of my favorite wines in the world is the Jean Foyard's Côte de Pie in Morgon. You know, if you look at that wine, I love that wine. That wine's extraordinary. Some of the wines of Thivan in Beaujolais. There's serious wines in Beaujolais. And Cinsault is almost our very serious, like, it can be as serious as Gamay can be when it's serious, but at the same time, it can be as simple as what the Beaujolais Nouveau can be. So it just depends on what you want to achieve. And so we do 80% whole cluster fermentation. We keep it for a month on the bunches. We press the grapes. The sugar usually goes up. It starts to kick off almost like a second primary fermentation in foodress, and then it ferments out dry. We rack it at about 8 months of the lees because it can get reductive, and age it for another 4 months on the lees, all in very old, 30-year-old wooden foodress. So there's no pickup of wood. We try and bottle that purity of fruit, the brightness, strawberry. It's a very primal red fruit kind of wine. And we have amazing tuna here on the coast. You catch a tuna, you cut it in a proper steak, you add some sesame seeds, you share it in the pan, you chill the bottle a little bit, and you pour a glass, and you've got one hell of a meal. It's not that difficult. Because it's got tannin.
Yeah, you have to have the amazing tuna from not very far away. It helps a little bit.
No.
You know, you mentioned Piedmont. You mentioned Piemonte early on, and one of the things that, you know, always strikes me about Barolo and Barbaresco is that when you pour a glass and you look at it, we're conditioned to think that to be great, red wine has to be dark and impenetrable, like Cabernet Sauvignon. And when you pour Barolo and Barbaresco, they're not. They're translucent at best. They look light. You know, they're light, bright red, cherry red in the glass, kind of like this. And you look at it and you go, well, that's going to be a wimpy wine. And then you taste it and it's about as wimpy as you are. It's not very wimpy, certainly.
So often when people drink the Porfather, the Cinsault, I can see them smelling the wine and then they think it's like this playful thing, and then it comes and it grabs them. You know, when you walk into your friend's home or like a stranger's home and you see this little dog run up to you, you want to almost reach out and strike it, and then the little dog goes like, wow. And you think, I didn't expect that. You know, I didn't see this little dog with its attitude. And that's Cinsault. Sometimes it looks like this little pup that comes running up to you, just looks all friendly on the color and everything, and the next moment the dog goes, wow. And that's Cinsault. You know, a lot has happened with the grape in South Africa, and not only our bottling, but there's a lot of very good single vineyard bottlings now. And I find most of them very well done and good good intellect, good thinking, good philosophy. So it's definitely a massive class that's rising up in the country. And people are starting to plant Cinsault again, which is exciting. Very difficult to make good Cinsault from young vine Cinsault, but at least if you don't plant young, you won't have old in the future. So you must keep on planting.
You don't make Pinotage.
Not at this stage. I like the grape, but Pinotage is a man-made grape, like Müller-Thurgau or Marcelin or Optima, or all of this magnitude of crossings. And at this stage, I only work with grapes that's kind of like ancient historical, because I have such a huge bearing on history and tradition. So I actually like Pinotage. I just don't make it. I really like it. I think there's very good ones in South Africa. The problem with Pinotage is the people. The problem is not Pinotage. The problem is people. There's very good ones in the country, and I think there's a number of individuals in the country that's now really dialed in on the grape, and they're making exceptional examples.
I asked John Engelbrecht once why he didn't make Pinotage, and he said, because I've never tasted one I wanted to drink. So why would I make it?
Yeah, I don't know. I won't be that harsh. It's maybe. Oh, I don't know when you had the interview with him, but
20 years ago.
I think of recent times, you must remember South African wine in the last 10 years. There's been a revolution here. There's no country that's had the fine wine revolution like it's been here.
Right.
It's contagious. It's everywhere, and so Pinotage is in that revolution. It's not sitting on the side or whatever. And there's a number of guys now that's making really good Pinotage. They're making such good Pinotage that I'm even considering making it.
Huh. Do you know Zelma Long?
Yeah.
And Mike?
You
know Mike?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. I sold so much Warwick Estates at my store in Nashville that they paid for me to visit them in South Africa. That's 25 years ago, but I loved his wines. That 3 Cape Ladies was fantastic.
The Villafonte wines, they're very precise, they're very consistent. And I'm not saying that in like a boring way. I think they set out to do with a very clear objective, and they're going very hard after that objective. And I'm really watching their wines because I find it interesting what's happening with the Villafonte C and the Villafonte N. And also a number of vintages have been bottled, so it's very interesting to follow the line over the last decade and a bit.
Well, Zelma comes from the lineage she comes from, and her background at Robert Mondavi and Long Vineyard.
Yeah.
She's going to have a certain approach to winemaking that would be very different from yours.
Yeah, but my approach is conducive to where I live. If I lived in maybe up in the Helderberg and Stellenbosch, I would have made a Cabernet Franc dominated wine. But if you live in the Swartland, it's more like living in Bandel or Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It will make no sense to plant Cabernet in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, as it will make no sense to plant Grenache in Burgundy. At least not now. Maybe in the future, but let's see.
Well, that Beaujolais, that winemaker from Maupassant in Beaujolais, told us that they had planted some Syrah in the southern part of Beaujolais, because the terroir in the southern part of Beaujolais is very similar to the terroir in the northern part of Hermitage, and they just think that with climate change, Syrah in the southern part of Beaujolais might be very successful.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they approved 13 different new grape varieties in Bordeaux to combat disease, mostly to combat disease, right? Because it's warmer, there's more disease in the vineyards. They need disease-resistant vines. Did the 3 years of drought previous to 2019 contribute to the excellence of 2019, that the vines had to work so hard to find water to create more?
I think we're now busy with 20. 2020 was obviously, we just finished that. And the wines of 2019, I think if we got a heat wave in 2019, in February, we would have been done and out. We were saved. Normally we get very big heat waves in February, in the month of harvest. And it didn't happen in 2019. I think that was a very big factor. The harvest in 2019 came in a record time, very compressed, very fast, one of the fastest harvests ever. So 2019 came down to your ability to ace logistics. 2019 was all logistics. Having the right boxes in the right locations with the right picking teams, getting the chronological order right, getting your working in the cellar, the whole fit of the hand and the glove had to be perfect. And again, we only make 65,000 bottles, but our winery's floor surface is the size of a 300-ton winery. We've got a lot of luxury here. Every vineyard's got its own tank. Every vineyard every year goes into the same tank. So if we need to ramp up the system, we can pick everything in 3 days because every vineyard's got its own tank. So with that in mind, we can act very swiftly on a vintage like 2019, but a lot of other producers got caught. You know, if you've got a red wine tank that's not dedicated to anything and you must ferment as much red wine into that tank as you can, that's a completely different story. But every vineyard we plant or farm has got its own tank, and that tank's only dedicated to that vineyard. So I can pick it today, I can pick it tomorrow, and I can leave it on the schemes for as long as I want.
Did you learn important lessons in 2019 that you'll carry forward?
Pardon?
Did you learn important lessons in 2019 that you will learn from going forward? That you will benefit from going forward?
Yeah, I think 2019 was one of those years. I mean, the logistical thing, I think, I always, from my accounting perspective, I'm always getting asked, why do we have so many trucks? Why do we have, on such a small winery, 2 forklifts? Why do we have 4,000 picking loads? If on paper we only need 400. And it's all about, it's not about being excessive, it's just being about being effective. I think our logistics hit an 8 point in 2019. From a viticultural perspective, what I learned in 2019 is that I don't think you can, I think there's a line where, you know, we would not have survived financially another year of drought. 3 years completely depleted the reserves. You know, and I'm not only the reserves on the plants, but also the reserves financially into our economical scheme at the winery. We save up every year, we have a piggy bank, we are in agriculture, shit happens all the time, you must be ready, you need backup. But you know, over 3 years, we really dived into our savings, and be that the savings of the soil moisture, the savings in our bank account, the savings in our emotions, in our spirit. You know, when you see plants that you love that much suffer from yet another year of drought, I mean, you become depressive. It's like what the guys now with the fires in California, it starts to mentally impact you. So when we now had rain in 2020, I tell you, I feel like I've been on holiday the whole year. I didn't even feel COVID. I've got rain. So I didn't feel COVID because I had rain.
Well, the farm gives you effective social distancing too.
Yeah. I drink a lot of brandy, so I don't need to be that distant. Brandy kills everything.
So I have 9 more minutes of your time. Please talk about the 2019 Transport.
So Transport is, that's an interesting vineyard because I think of all our wines we produce, it's kind of the one that's the more difficult to understand. And I will try and put up a picture here of what that vineyard looks like. This is Tinta Barocca.
Right.
And I don't know if you know Tinta Barocca.
Well, I do, but I'm not sure the other people watching it will. So we'd love for you to talk about it.
So Tinta Barocca this vineyard was planted in 1974. So it's not that old. It's actually my dog in the background. 1974, it's a bunch of a grape that used to be extensively planted in the Douro Valley. It's got more or less the grain pattern of Syrah, long, thin, cylindrical bunch. Probably one of the tastiest grapes I've come across in terms of flavor. The only thing about Tinta Barocca is it's very sensitive to sunburn. So we farm the canopies. Obviously, we farm bush vines, but when we do the thin and shoot trimmings, we leave more strategical leaves at the top so that there's a bigger shading effect because of the thin skins and sunburn. So we farm it quite different from our other red bush vine vineyards. We farm it Syrah, actually the same. And then to explain to you what Tinta Barocca tastes like is it's basically got the herbal, spicy aromatics of Northern Rhone Syrah and the tannins of Piedmont wines. So if you would blend a Rhone wine with a Piedmont wine, then you have this one. So you've got huge textural qualities, huge tannin, firm acidity, a massive mid-palate weight, a wine built for aging. This wine's got the structure of a full-blown Cabernet or a Sangiovese from Brunello de Montalcino or a Piemontese Nebbiolo. It's got that textural aspects, but then it's got the aromatics of Rhone wine, Northern Rhone wine. So it's got amazing characters and characteristics to it. But I do want to urge people to age it. You shouldn't drink this wine if it's not 10 years old. You take your own life in your own hands if you drink it young. I'm not responsible.
Well, I'm tasting it right now, and it's
delicious.
It's pretty damn good. Now, I'm not worried about my life. I'm worried about being able to buy as much as I would like to based on how good it is. But again, since we've got it open, the people watching us have a bottle open, I'd say put the cork in it and come back to it in 2 or 3 days, and then come back to it again in 2 or 3 days, and then come back to it again in 2 or 3 days, and you can kind of see how it is going to evolve with age.
Yeah, no, it's Tinta Barocca was extensively planted in the Douro Valley pre-phylloxera.
Right.
But if you compare it to Tinta Francesa, to Riga Nacional, Suzal, Tinta Franc, who am I missing? I'm missing quite a
Bastardo.
Yeah, Bastardo.
Tinta Francesca.
Francesca. That of all of them, Tinta Barocca is the shyest bearer. So after phylloxera, it wasn't replanted with the same enthusiasm because the growers were planting after phylloxera. They were planting for kilos and weight.
Right.
They weren't planting for wine. They were planting for fruit. So
Tonnage.
And Dirk Niepoort is a very good friend of mine, and I've had very many great bottles of wine in my life with him, and some of those old port wines and So unfortunately, not, still wine's fairly new. I mean, I say new, 2 decades, 3 decades. But I think kind of Tinta Barroca got a raw deal in Portugal, but we in South Africa in 1950, and for no reason and no sense, because in South Africa there's a lot of things that doesn't make sense, like in most countries. Somebody decided to import a lot of Tinta Barroca. It was propagated extensively, and a lot of it was planted in the Swartland. So it's kind of, it was at the same time when the Portuguese colonies, in terms of Angola and Mozambique, was thriving. So the idea was they're going to plant Tinta Barroca, they're going to make port style and red wines out of it, and they're going to sell it to the 2 colonies. That was the main plan.
Right.
And then we know what happened in the 70s. There was the overthrow and all of that, and the Portuguese all went back to Portugal, and Angola went its way, and Mozambique went its way, and the Tinta Barroca ended up making a little bit of port style, sweet fortified wines here, and in the Swartland, a lot of dry red Tinta Barroca has been made since the 70s non-stop. So it's kind of our regional heritage, and that's why I produce this wine, because it's typical of at least the last 40, 50 years of what's been going on in the Swartland. And it's an important part of our story that needs to be preserved. And I love the vineyard.
Yeah. Well, it's, Winston Churchill famously said, women in port are alike in that they are at their best at 30 years old.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not really a thing that you can say these days and get away with it without being slapped, but perhaps it applies to this wine. I think it's easily a 25-year wine.
No, this wine you must just leave. I mean, it's it's difficult because we don't make a lot of wine, and then there's not much in circulation, and then when people get their hands on them, they get so excited and they just drink them. So I'm like that, because I buy other people's wine, but a little bit of refrain will carry a long way in terms of these wines, in terms of actually drinking them in time, in good standing, when all of those elements come together. And you might have spent $60 on a bottle of wine. I don't know even how much our wines cost, but I just know if you wait long enough, you'll get 300% return on what you actually paid for. So that's my urge. Well,
based on the number that you said for your total production, I think we bought about 7.5% of your production this year here at Sunfish Cellars. So we're pretty proud of that.
No, thank you
in that way. So I always end these, well, almost always end these sessions with one question, which has often been, I've been glad I asked. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not asking you what's the greatest wine you've ever tasted. My question is, what's the most memorable wine experience of your life?
But I've been so blessed. I think the first time I truly got to know the wines of Chateau Rayas.
Oh my God. I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you just said that, because when I tasted the Pofadder, I started to ask you if you had ever tasted Chateau Rayas.
No, I know Chateau Rayas very well.
Oh my God.
The first time I ever tasted Rayas, I was invited by a gentleman in London. I was at the time living in Spain. I worked with Grenache for 10 years in Spain, and we tasted Chateau Rayas from 1978 to 1998, 20 years. Huh. 20 years. 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 And we weren't very many people. And I didn't spit, and I finished all the bottles. I can't remember how I got to bed that evening. But I remember every wine. And that 1978 Chateau Rias Blanc, it was a Blanc tasting. That was the Friday, and the Saturday, we did the same flight, but in red. 78 red to 98. So that was one experience, just split over 2 days, because, I mean, you can't do that in a day. For me, it was an important event. I mean, I can tell you about crazy things in Burgundy and outside Burgundy and Italy and all over. But why that I will single out that one is that's where I realized that great white wine can be made outside continental climates.
You know, I was the sommelier at a restaurant in Nashville, Tennessee for several years, where Thomas Keller was actually the chef immediately before opening the French Laundry. And we bought a gentleman's private cellar, and we had 3 cases of 78 Rias Blanc in the wine cellar that we sold over the course of 5 or 6 years. And it's one of the greatest white wines I've ever tasted.
No, that wine's next level. I actually bottled the wine for Thomas Keller once.
Oh, really?
I only ever once bottled the Coolamellum 500 milliliters, half-liter bottles.
Right.
And that I did for Thomas Keller, I think it was Per Se, or yeah, I think it was for Per Se. Yeah. So
Well,
yeah, I've had a wonderful experience in the world of wine. It's been very kind to me, and I wouldn't be doing anything else. I'm still that geek of 18 years old discovering wine. Nothing's changed.
When we started doing these Zoom tastings back in March, one of my most important clients said, the 2 bucket list winemakers I've always wanted to meet are Daniel Ravier at Domaine Tempier and Eben Sadie at Sadie Family. And I guess, well, I'm going to show this for my customers on February 4th, but I may send this recording to him today, just because it's so special. And so in a 4-day period, we've met his goals of having a tasting with Daniel Ravier and you. I have to tell you, I've been very, very excited that you were willing to give us an hour and a half of your time for this. And, sometimes it's difficult for things to meet your expectations of what they would be. But this has been a very, very special hour and a half. And I wish February 4th were tomorrow so I could share it with my friends and customers, because number one, the wines are glorious. And number 2, your story and your passion are so enthralling. I just cannot thank you enough for taking the time to spend with us today.
No, likewise. Your friend is most welcome to come visit us on the farm. I'm not going anywhere. And I hope that we can soon return back to a little bit more normality in the world. I hope that we can overcome our current complications and realities. And I hope that I can come and visit you at Sunfish at some stage. I've never been in that neck of the woods. And I hope one of my dearest friends in the world lives in Napa. Maybe one, I would say, is, when you think of your best friends, you got to dwindle it down to 3 people, really. And one of my 3 best friends in the world lives in Napa. So I have a huge inclination to fly west, because I would like to spend as much time as I can with him, because I just so love and enjoy the individual. So I'll be back in the States as soon as I can.
Well, we'll look forward to that. I would encourage you to come in the summer, don't come in January or February.
Oh, I love the cold. I'm tired of the heat. I'm getting burned up the whole year.
Okay,
And,
well, then come whenever, well, I should have said, please come whenever you're free, because we would be thrilled.
No,
You know, and
I will-
honestly, after this time with you, I'm even more excited and honored to have your wines here. This has been very, very special. And
No,
thank you so much.
very
And
much.
if Catherine, if Kat, if you're still with us, thank you for making it happen. It was, I really appreciate it. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Eben.
Thank you for your support. God bless you all. Stay well.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye.